Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on top of page 1475. After explaining how, from the perspective of Atzmus, which means the creator of it all, and you can't even call him creator, but the ultimate reality of it all, where the parsa and the tzimtzum have no effect, as he said. There's no does not conceal or cover anything. Indeed, it is actually a force of the divine, that very concealment. And therefore, on that level, there's no two states of ayin. The whole idea of an ayin of the yesh amiti, an ayin of yesh anivra, is only from the perspective of the Oilimus and say the Shtalshlus, which is the creation. And there the parsa and tzimtzum absolutely do have an effect. It diminishes and conceals that the Gali can go and engage and relate to, be tailored to existence, the yesh, the ayin of the yesh anivra, as we learn. But from the perspective of Atzmus, it's all ayin and bottle completely. Everything is nullified. So according to that, the Rebbe Rashab says there are no two levels of ayin. Hakolu b'chinas ayin aleph, ayin echad, which is the ayin of the yesh amiti. So what does it mean? Ani rishon, ani achren. That there's two levels, and he's talking about God. Ani, I am the first, and I am the last. And also he asked, based on this, there's no hisavas either. All of creation is only simply an extension of God, godliness. But it says, Bereishis bara Elokim. So he began answering and saying, Acha inyan hu, that very Atzmus did not create one ayin, one form of light or expression, called the ayin of the Yesh Amiti. He actually chose to transmit in two ways. Like he says, it's not that the first ayin abeis is amshacha sa'ara, a reflection of the first ayin. In beis madregas nimshachim from Ein Sof Baruch Hu. So from the outset, the first level of ayin was necessary, but Hashem also wanted to have the second level. However, before the tzimtzum and the parsa, they're all combined as one, because they're both powers of Atzmus, one Atzmus. But initially, Shneim Klulim initially they're all encompassed, they're all part of Atzmus. But then v'nivdalu al yidei tzimtzum. The tzimtzum comes and separates them. The pulasat tzimtzum shanil b'chinas ayin habeis ma ayin ha'alev v'nasa b'chinas lichuk min ha'atzmus she be'erech b'chinas makir. Li is b'chinas makir. So he's obviously not finished the subject, but the first point he wanted to make is that itself is Atzmus' intention, to have these two levels of ayin. But there's a process. So you could, of course, ask the question, why didn't he just make the ayin right away two levels of ayin? So I don't know if he's going to answer it explicitly, but I will just say this. Because at the end of the day, the goal is that it should all get united and we should experience it all as one. So it has to go through a singular state, even though it's going to end up being two different entities after the tzimtzum. Just like in the neshama v'guf, the soul and the body, if you think about it, they both come from Atzmus. Everything comes from Atzmus. But at the end of the day, God wanted a structure of Eir and Keli, soul and body. Here we're not talking on that level yet. That we don't have that distinction. So he wants to have two levels of the divine that just expresses Elokus, godliness, and the divine as it relates to existence. And as such, they are two states, but they begin as one because ultimately they are coming from one place and you do want them to join. I don't know if he says it in here in Ayin Beis, but another place in Chassidus it does say that. So point being here, however, that's why that's the beginning at least of the answer to the question, why is it not one just ayin, since everything in Atzmus is all one ayin and bottle, all the ayin of the Yesh Amiti. And the answer is because that very Asmus wants to have two different tracks ultimately. But he wants it to also make sense. So that's where the Tzimtzum comes into play. The Tzimtzum will ultimately separate them. But he's going to explain it now with an example. So we're on line 3, on top of page 1475. I'm going to continue reading inside now. And hopefully this will become even more understood. And I'll take questions after that, because as I said, we're learning further, but it's just going to help us understand this better. So line 4 on page 1475, the text and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. V'zeu hamavur b'kama mekemes. What we just said, this is what is explained in a number of places. The bechlolus, in general, the way God created the structure, hein gimel madreges yesh v'ayin v'yesh. This actually is almost word from word from volume 2. And I just want to refer you there because this definitely complements what it says there, and that complements what we're learning here. Just going back to the end of volume 2, let's just see where it is inside. I believe it starts with the Rosh Hashanah Maimer, if I recall correctly. Let's remember the language. Okay, yeah. At the bottom of page 1140, I'm looking at volume 2, the Rosh Hashanah Maimer. Levels based the Rosh Hashanah. Let me just see something here. One minute. Yeah. Levels based Rosh Hashanah Tafrei Shayim Vov. So at the bottom there, he begins discussion about the two Yediyas, Das Elyon and Das Tachten, Kel Deus Hashem. And then on page 1141, I believe, yeah. So like third way down the page, he says these words. Yedua de b'chol seishtalshlus, mereish kadargan ad seif kol dargan yesh gimel madreges, ve'hem bechinis yesh va'ayin v'yesh. Almost word for word what he says here. So one of them, he says, is explained in a number of places. One of these places is earlier in Ayin Beis at the pages I just referred you to. Page 1141. So going back now to here, the Bechlolos and Gimel Madreges, Yesh, Va'ayin, V'yesh. So it's 3 states. Yesh literally means a state of being. Ayin means a state of non-being, like a vacuum. And the last yesh is another state of being. And what does that mean? Hainu. What are these 3? Yesh amiti, the true yesh, the true reality. When you say something really exists, what's the ultimate yesh? Yesh amiti is atzmos. The yesh anivra, on the other end of the spectrum comes the created reality. So this is our existence, our consciousness. Va'ayin shebeneim. And there's an ayin, a void, a vacuum between them. Now, ayin, when I say vacuum, does not mean it's just empty space. It means it's like a transition from one to the next. And it's actually a bridge that bridges them. So why is it called ayin? So we learned earlier back in volume 2 and also here, number 1, ayin, because it's bottled completely to the yesh, amiti. And it's also a mystery to the yesh anivra. So it's a place that God created, so-called a channel, we'll call it a field of energy. Oir. That is ayin compared to atzmus, to the yesh amiti. And it's ayin, a mystery, and beyond the yesh anivra. So it serves like a bridge. And there's more explanations. That's just one basic one. But then he continues. Va'ayin nechlak lishnayim. And this ayin, this in-between bridge or interface, divides into 2. The Hainu is a unique language you don't find so often. The she'ein ze ayin ma'ayin. So this one ayin breaks into two, divides into two, and that means it's not ayin from an ayin. Kim sha'ayin hu bebeis madreges. So like he said earlier at the bottom of the previous page, it's not that God created an ayin, and then that ayin, so to speak, a subset of that, a ha'ara of that is the second ayin. No, that's not the meaning. You say divides into two, it means that the ayin hu bebeis madreges, that there's two levels of the ayin. So then why do we call it a one ayin? Why do we say yesh ayin yesh and not yesh ayin ayin yesh? Because initially, before they were separated, they were both encompassed. Klulim yachad, v'klulim michodim be'ein sof baruch. They were joined together. They were all encompassed together, and encompassed and united. But ein sof baruch. By the ad simsum v'aparsa, through the diminished simsum, concealment and the partition, nechlaka ayin l'shnayim. That's what divided the ayin into two. But they were always two. The only thing is you didn't see them as two. They were both. They were at that point a divine, all divine, rooted in Atzmos. So what you see here, so that's not ayin ma'ayin. That's why we say yesh ma'ayin or ayin miyesh. You don't say ayin ma'ayin. So you say there's a yesh ayin and yesh. That ayin consists of two. However, initially you don't see the two. They're not obvious. It's not discernible. And then it becomes discernible through the tzimtzum. So I'll just give an example, if I may. He's going to give his own example, but I want to just give an example. For example, when a child is conceived, and it's one cell that has been fertilized, the egg has been fertilized by a seed, and it's conceived a cell. This cell will develop, will split into two, and then into four, and then into 8, and 16, and so on, into trillions of cells, which will be the makeup of the newborn child. So you don't say that cell number 2 is like ayin ma'ayin is only a reflection of cell number 1. They're all in that one cell, like a seed, is encompassed the whole, everything that will develop from there. However, it's not discernible at that point. Not nikr. It's not like first to develop, let's say, the brain. And from the brain will develop the other parts. Everything is there already. But it's encompassed in a concentrated form. Then what will happen through the gestation process of pregnancy, you can call that like tzimtzumim, that will slowly conceal the intensity of that concentrated cell and allow it to start breaking into 2, into 4, and ultimately to limbs and organs and to a full-blown child. Why? Because in the initial plan, I speak now, Lamaila, God wanted the ayin of the Yesh Nivra just as he wants the ayin of the Yesh Amiti. It's not like he wants the ayin of Yesh Amiti, and incidental to that, it happened, it breaks into 2, or a reflection of it comes. No, it was always meant to have 2 levels. However, he also wanted them to be first joined together, like in one concentrated entity, klulim biyachad, klulim biyuchadim, and then a tzimtzum would come and distinguish and separate, and now you see actually 2 tracks. That's what he's saying here. Now, you can understand the importance of this. I'll just spell it out, because I'm not sure how much the Rebbe Rashab is actually going to say. The importance of this is critical to our central theme here, right? You know why? Because at the end of the day, remember, we want a dira b'tachtonim. We want the nefesh habamis, which is a result or an expression of the tzimtzum, to experience the divine. If everything was really just the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and everything else is essentially, you can say, I don't want to say a sideshow. It's not a sideshow, but I mean to say it comes only from there, then you ultimately don't have a divine experience that relates to us. we have to somewhat lose ourselves and become sublimated in the first ayin. But being that the chatchila, initially, the kavanah is to have the two, but it begins by joining as one, as being encompassed on one. And then the tzimtzum separates, then the idea of Yechud Tata and Yechud Elah and Das Ayin and Das Tachten is really two equal divine forces that are equal all the way in the source, then divide as two different experiences, but ultimately through our Avodah, we can retrace the steps and go all the way back to the source and join them again. So that will allow the Elokus to permeate existence even on our terms, not just on its own divine terms. That's why it's so important to make this, why he's making this case, because you could ask, okay, fine. So who cares if there's one ayin? Why do you need to have two levels of ayin? Why can't you just say ani rishon, ani rishon and ani achron? Why do you have to say that? Because you want to give real divine and atzmusdik legitimacy also to the divine that enters into existence. It's only that from Atzma's point of view, it's all one. And from Atzma's point of view, it's all Atzma's. But once God chooses to express, he chooses two forms of expression. Initially, they're one. And then the tzimtzum will actually break them into two that we can see them in an obvious way. And then when the process begins from the bottom up, to reconnect and all the way go back, as I said, to retrace all the way back to the source. So you have here is basically Atzma's perspective. Then Atzma's creating these two tracks. Then the two tracks are first as one, then they become separate through the tzimtzum. And then our Avodah, how we see it from the bottom up, is we go through each step. First Yechud Tata, then Yechud Elah. Then we join them together. Then we bring them all the way back up and try to understand it as much as we can through Atzma's eyes. But you can't do that without first going from the bottom up. It's just putting things a little into general context. Now, I was going to give a mashal for this, but before we go to the mashal, if anybody wants to ask anything. And I'm beginning to understand also why the Mittler Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab going down this track. Because when you look in the initial Torah Oyer from the Alter Rebbe, the Maimer Mika Hashem Elokeinu, Hamagbi L'Sheves, he only says that his bonus of Shema and Baruch Shem, which teaches us about Atzmus being beyond existence and Leishanisi and so on, ultimately affects the animal soul, but he doesn't explain how. So essentially, the Mittler Rebbe's beer, this whole discussion of Yesh Ma'ayin, and now there's the Das Ayin and Das Tachten, Yechud Elah, Yechud Tata, and the Rebbe Rashab elaborating even more, actually explained the Torah Eir in a very profound way with the deeper meaning of the Torah. And when you go back to the Torah Eir, and we will do that. I'm just speaking out loud here, thinking out loud, honestly, because I'm just making the connection. We'll explain the Torah and understand the deeper meaning. I think it's going to be quite fascinating to see how the Alter Rebbe hinted to all of this. Definitely, it's included in there, but only after you learn it in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer and Ayin Beis can you really appreciate it. Okay.
Yes, I have a comment or a question. The way I'm sort of looking at it is what you're explaining is that, so to speak, God showed us a picture, a complete picture of Gan Eden time of a Dira B'Taktonim, and then the crossword puzzle, it was broken up, and now he says, now you put back the pieces and create the puzzle again. From your perspective, you do the work. I showed it to you, now you bring it back and make it. My question here is, what about Tosfos or? Do we add anything to that picture, or is it simply walking the steps back and bringing those two different tracks back into one, unifying the picture, so to speak? Or are we actually going to change the picture as it looks in its primordial state?
The answer is yes, we do change. It's not just revealing that which was there. Absolutely. In the beginning of Samach Vav, he asked that very question, and he gives two answers. And Ayin Beis for sure takes it even further, where he says, he asked the question, since through Avodah we're going to be mamshir the Eir from before the Tzimtzum into the Kalim after the Tzimtzum, so what was accomplished? We're just back to square one. It's like everything was once divine, then it was concealed, and now we're recognizing the divine even through the concealment, meaning even in a world following the Tzimtzum. And his two answers are, one, that itself is a chiddush, that Kalim should appreciate Elokus before the Tzimtzum. So the chiddush is not so much from the point of view of godliness, the point of view of us recognizing it. In other words, a teacher teaches a student, and then the student can come to understand the idea as good as the teacher. The achievement is not from the teacher's point of view, per se, that even a student who once could not understand it, did not have the Kalim to contain the idea, now can contain it. That's the first thing he says. And then he says, but furthermore, there's actually a chiddush, a new oir, that even before the Tzimtzum was not there, that is generated through our Avodah Lamata, because it reaches all the way into Atzmus, which is the source of it all. In other words, there's something that happens, which we have to discuss at length. I'm not going to do it right now, because it comes down to Leishanisi, and we have to understand something in Atzmus. Because Nesava, at the end of the day, God desired a dir b'tachtenim. He did not desire Eirein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. Doesn't say that anywhere. He didn't desire Atzilus. Those are all, in a sense, really stepping stones. They're all godly and all part of God's plan. But he desired a dir b'tachtenim, meaning the Araved and Tachtenim reaches a place that all these levels don't reach. That's why we learned earlier, Ein Arech Lecha. Remember, the Yesh reaches into Atzmus. You can't know Mitzusim Atzmusei from Eir itself, and many other ideas that we learned earlier. So through our Avodah, we in some way trigger something in Atzmus that's even more than the two tracks that we're learning about. What that is needs to be discussed, but the answer is absolutely yes. It's not just, even according to the first explanation, it's not back to square one. Because now you've made, as a student, look, the Rebbe left shluchim, left students, and that's a chiddush, because the students are continuing his work. If the Rebbe had done it himself, which he did, that's great. But there is something achieved, because now people like us who are not on that level can also spread chiddush. But there's another chiddush that even, so to speak, in the Rebbe, in the source itself, there's also a chiddush. That, as I said, I will discuss this a lot more as we go along, because this touches already the overarching theme of Ayin Beis in general, Chassidus in general, and but I think it's relevant. That's why I'm answering the question, because it is part of this whole ultimate discussion. And as we wind down Ayin Beis, we're literally less than 3 pages away from the finish line here. It's good to look at the big picture as well. Okay. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that was helpful. Very helpful. Quick question. You say you'll discuss it later, so I'm not asking for an answer now. But will we ultimately get to the point where our avoda, the two tracks we've been talking about, Hisavus and avoda, our avoda can actually reach a level of Ani Hashem Lo Shanisi, that we can actually change that through our avoda?
The way he already discussed this earlier in Ayin Beis. He doesn't call it change, because Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi is immutable. You can't, it's no pun intended. That itself is immutable. You can't change that. The God that there's a reason that Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi, because he's a nitzchi. He's a reality that is unchangeable. But that does not mean that that God doesn't want to have a relationship. And understand that, I would refer you back to the Maimer with Sav. Yitzchak posted it on the group. The Maimer in Sav, Tofresh Ayin Hey, volume 2, he addresses this very, very directly, and more places as well. That's part of what I will want to discuss later when I do more of a full summation, because this is where I didn't want to go. I don't want to go off on a tangent too much. So suffice it to say, it does have some type of, something happens. What that is, whether you can call it shinoi, hispilus, impact, I wouldn't use those words. But but I would use words like he said, that the Avodah Sa'adam does ultimately affect. So there are levels of Elokus that are directly impacted, like Malchus, the Tikla, the potter's wheel. There are levels of Elokus are not impacted directly, but are drawn down. And in Atzmus, look, when we say Nachas Ruach, we say Reach Nechayach, Nachas Ruach, Shamarta V'Nasir, saying that God, we grade him, we cause Nachas Ruach to Hashem. Just use that term. What does that mean exactly? Is that lower levels of Elokus? Is it Atzmus? So that I would refer back to those Maimorim. If you really want to see now, go back there. But I assure you that I will address this. That I can I will address it because it has to be addressed ultimately. But right now is not the right place to go. Not to go into this right now is going to be very distracting, in my opinion. So I think let's leave it right here where it is, and we'll discuss it more.
Thank you.
Okay. The Yuvan Zeh. So now this idea that there are two levels of Ayin, but initially they're all encompassed as one. And the Parsa and Tzimtzum, or the Tzimtzum and Parsa separate them. He says the Yuvan Zeh will understand this al derech hamoshel hayadua, similar to the famous and known example, be'in hashpos ha'seichel ma mashpia and Mekabel. This is a classic example in Chassidus of the ashpah, the transmission of seichel, of intelligence, of ideas, from a mashpia to a Mekabel, from a transmitter to a recipient. Sometimes says Rav and Talmud, teacher and student. But Mashpia and Mekabel is broader terminology. Sun and moon is Mashpia and Mekabel. He's talking about seichel here. Excuse me. So it's not really the sunlight. It's Mashpia and Mekabel. So he says like this. So that's the classic or famous mashal. Hariyah seichel kamoshu etzla mashpia. The era seichel, the energy of the idea. He doesn't just say the word seichel. Era seichel. It's like the spirit of the seichel, the way it is by the mashpia. Eina be'erech hamakabel klal. It's not commensurate at all to this recipient. Because we're not talking about colleagues here. We're talking about a teacher and a student. We're talking about someone on a higher level, much higher level, and a Mekabel, a recipient, on a much lower level, initially. So that Eira Seichel and the Mashpia is not Be'erech. Well, right. However, Nimtze boy gama Eir Seichel HaShayach El Mekabel. But you have to say that within the teacher, is to be found also the seichel that he's going to teach to the student, to the Mekabel. Because the fact is, he's going to teach him. In other words, he's going to take all his intelligence and he's going to diminish it ultimately and spoon feed it or transmit it to the student. So you have to say it's there. It's just raksha ein nikar klal. However, it's not discernible at all. At that point, if you saw a teacher studying, let's say, studying Ayin Beis, studying any idea, and he's not yet teaching, if you were able to get into his brain and able to experience what he's learning, you're going to see the teacher level. You're not going to see the student level. Because that's where he's at right now. He's consciously focusing on learning. You know, Chassidim always had a little taiva to see the Rebbe learning when no one else was around. I mean, I don't know what you can see physically, but still, you see someone completely concentrated on their own level. But being that he's a mashpia, that he will ultimately come, and I'm not talking about in time, and maybe a minute later, maybe an hour later, maybe a day later, maybe 5 years later, but this mashpia is going to be mashpia seichel, from this seichel of his to the Mekabel. So you have to say it's there already initially, even when he's completely consumed with his own on this level of understanding, which is not be'erech to the, and not commensurate to the Mekabel. However, it's not nikar. You won't see it. It's like, think of it like an object inside of a big ocean. You don't see it because the ocean is completely all-encompassing. Va'al yedei, and the mashal continues, va'al yedei shetzimtzum Shemitzamtzim, sorry. So what's the next step of the process? The Mashpia now, through being mitzamtzim, he's diminishing, meaning he's going away, so to speak. He's allowing his own level of understanding to recede in the background, which means he's mitzamtzim sichle ba'atzmei, within himself. Nimtza b'ha'er seichel ha'shaychel ha'mekabel. Then now what will emerge, if we were able to see internally the dynamics or the anatomy of what's going on, it would look like the seichel is receding his level of understanding, and now he's preparing himself to present this idea now to the Mekabel. So it's the second stage, and it's very different. What difference is really changed is only that Tzimtzum is allowing this level of seichel that relates to the student, not new, the level that was there before but not discernible, to become discernible. This seichel that is going to transmit to the recipient was there. He's repeating again the same idea, but because he wants for emphasis. So even before he's actually transmitting that, and before the tzimtzum, that seichel was there. However, it was not discernible. It was not obvious. It was not palpable. It was not, discernible. And through the tzimtzum, it becomes discernible, nikr, recognizable, v'nivdal la'atzmei. And separate becomes a separate entity, meaning it's now an identity of its own. And you can see this. Any mashpia knows that when you're learning something, you're in the process of absorbing the idea. Like it says, I did the Torah lemivla leipolit. When a person is busy absorbing, meaning learning on their own, they can't be exuding. They can't be teaching someone else. Then comes stage two, where the mashpia prepares himself and says, okay, now I've done my research, I've done my learning on my level. Now I'm going to develop a language that will convey this idea to the Mekabel. So that's a tzimtzum, and now that seichel that was there before is now emerging, and ultimately will be transmitted. Here he's still talking about within the eras. Remember, both levels are in the seichel of the mashpia. So there's two stages. The seichel of the mashpia is la'atzmei, and there is the seichel for the Mekabel, but it's not discernible because there was no tzimtzum yet. And then the tzimtzum allows the second level of seichel for the Mekabel to emerge, all within the mashpia. That's the moshel. Now he's going to give the nimshal. What is the moral? What do we learn from this lamaila? So let's learn the second half now. V'dugma mizeh lamaila, and the example of this above, meaning by Hashem, by God, is like this. The begin is gile era atzmus. Yesh b'zeh beis madregas. We're talking about gile era atzmus. That the gile era, that once atzmus chose to express himself. Express means not necessarily to a Mekabel. The mere fact that he is being revealed. Gile era atzmus. There's two levels from the outset, like he just said with the teacher. One is a divine expression that is, so to speak, just for himself. It's like him thinking to himself. So there's an expression in Chazal that Hivdili took the oil and separated for himself, not give it out to anyone else. And the second level from the outset, like with the teacher, this is also that dimension of oil that is going to be needed to create the worlds. Let's say that for the need of the worlds. It doesn't say creation, he says let's say for the purpose of existence, not for the purpose of himself. The only thing is that this eir is lo yonikir v'nivdal b'fnei atzmei. But at that stage, that first stage, it's not discernible or separate on its own. Everything is one air. When you look at it, as he said before with the teacher, you just see the air of the teacher. That's all you see. You don't see two stages, two levels. He's adding. This was obvious before, but he's saying it now explicitly. It's quite powerful. That on that stage, the seichel, even for tzedek ha'elamis, meaning the oyer, even for the elamis, is b'maylo madrega, the same quality in the same level, like the oyer la'atzmei. So even though essentially there are two, but number one is that it's not discernible. Number two, the second level is on the same level as the first. It's simply koyach atzmus. Like I explained the other day about Yecholte. Why should it be less atzmus than the oyer la'atzmei? It's true from our perspective, if you see a light that God shines just to himself and not for any others, to us it would seem much more superior than a light that he's shining to us. But from atzmus' point of view, both of them are equally distant and equally close. He doesn't need light for himself either. And on the other hand, he wants a light for tzedek ha'elamis. So now both of them, atzmus wants two forms of expression. One expression that will reveal the divine, undiluted, seamless divine. Another is the divine as it creates existence. But in this stage, they're all b'chinas erechad. And they're b'mayla madrig, and the second is the same level as the first. The hainu, which means shachitzenius, hayikamaya pnimius. In other words, the outer light that would become outer later, as it through the tzimtzum, as it would extend and relate to existence, is at this stage like the pnimius, like the light that remains within the teacher, that is on his own level. Because everything is utterly and seamlessly connected, united in asmus. Asmus is baruch. And the air, not just mitzad atzmus, but also the air and the gili radiates in the outer dimension, meaning the second ayin or the second level of air, just like in the first level, the inner level of air. So then what's the difference between the two? Now comes the next stage.
This is redemption is gala. Right?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what means nisgala by you, but let me continue reading. Simsum, nivdal v'nifresh. Now, through the simsum, they're separate. Nifresh is another word for havdalah and hafrosh and havdalah and nifresh and divided. Hachitzenius min apnimius. That's what the simsum does. It actually divides the two, the outer from the inner. B'bechinas er b'fnei atzmei, that it should become a separate track of light, of energy. And not just a separate, that was one thing. That's not one with the first, but also it's not in the same quality now. Because this has to now engage with existence. So it has to be diminished. Just like the teacher, even though the within him that was for the student on the first level is on the same level, but when he starts to teach, when he's going to be teaching, he has to diminish it so the Mekabel can receive it. So it's not from his point of view, it's from the perspective of the Mekabel. And that's what happens through the Tzimtzum. Ayin Mashikosav. And he refers us to look at Bedibra Maskel Min HaMeitza Reish Ayin Ches. In the Maimer of Min HaMeitza, Rosh Hashanah Maimer of Tov Reish Ayin Ches, again referring to the year 1918, or this is 1917 actually, because Rosh Hashanah, but essentially a Maimer Tov Reish Ayin Ches, again telling us, making it clear that this is definitely written after that. Okay. So what you have here to sum up, and then I'll stop for questions, is like this. Atzmus, before Gilead and Oyer, and altogether, we're not even discussing here. That's Atzmus. But Atzmus wants to create an existence. To do so, the first thing, you need a leap from Bilti Mitzias Nimtza to Mitzias Nimtza. You need, because remember the very word expression, consciousness, Gilui, revelation, Oyer, is also non-existent. All this is meaningless from the point of view of Atzmus. But to create an existence like ours, you need to have consciousness. You need to have a manifestation. You need Metzias as we know Metzias, not as Atzmus knows Metzias. The way Atzmus knows Metzias is built in Metzias Nimtza, which we can only imagine or extrapolate through process of elimination. So Oyer is the way Atzmus chooses. It's really a muscle Oyer at the end of the day. For us to understand it, we use Oyer, light, like the sunlight, like Oyer HaNefesh, like the light of the Nefesh. So it's a way for us to understand how an etzem can extend itself, how an etzem can express itself. But synonymous to Oyer, you can easily interchange Oyer with the word expression, with the word consciousness, with the word gilui, revelation. Revelation does not mean revelation to me or to you or to anyone. It just means the very concept that God wants to manifest. Because without that, we don't have a world like ours. Now, you could ask, why does he want to manifest? So that goes back to Nesava. God desired to have a dira b'tachtein. There is no why. Because the whole seichel, if there's no Oyer, there's definitely no seichel. Nothing exists yet. But there is, so Oyer is the first, I like to call it the field of energy. The field of energy, an infinite field of energy. But since God wants, that should be a dira b'tachtein, there should be an interface and a joining and fusion of existence and the divine, and neither should be compromised. So he, from the outset, says, I want two things. I want the divine to be experienced, but I want the divine to be experienced by creation. So that essentially created two ayins. They're right now all one because it's one kavanah of Atzmus, one yechelus of Atzmus. But ultimately they will become two. And for that, we're going to need the tzimtzum. But prior to that, there are these two. So one is a divine expression, undiluted, untarnished, untouched. Tarnished is not a good word here. Untouched, like the freshly fallen snow. Pure divine expression without any consideration about existence. So you have a representation, like I gave the example of the ambassador, that God sends his ambassador to be, to watch over or to check out, to inspect what his people are doing. The job of the inspector, of the ambassador, is only to represent God. His job is not to work with them. His job is not to guide them. His job is just give me a report of what you see. I'm just giving it as an example. So there's the concept of an Oyer that all it is to express godliness. But that's not enough for dir b'tachtein. For tachtenim, you need to have an existence. Not just mitzias nimtza. That the first Oyer is also mitzias nimtza. But a Metzias Nimtza with structure. And for that, that's a Mekabel. So there's another level of Oyer that at this point is still all encompassed as one part of one Kavanas Ha'atzmus. And that level of Oyer, after the Tzimtzum, will be called the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. At this point, it's all part of God because the same Atzmus who wants divine, pure divine expression also wants a divine that will relate to existence. And then comes the Tzimtzum. And the Tzimtzum actually actualizes this kavana. So there's states before the Tzimtzum, there's the Tzimtzum, and then there's us. Of course, our Avodah is to reverse the process and work our way back through the Tzimtzum back to these levels, these two levels, and then ultimately to Atzmus, or to two levels as their one expression of Atzmus, and ultimately to Atzmus himself.
The symptom is part of the Atzmus also.
One second. So that's a summary of what we just learned. And as I said earlier, this is going to take some time to process. So take as much time as you want, but I'll be happy to stop now if there are any questions.
The symptom is a part of him also. It's not something is coming in between and creates a separation between the two ayins.
In the previous page, he called it the koyach. He said that the Hester is who koyach ha'ein sof k'may koyach ha'gili. Yeah, absolutely. That's why it does not conceal for Atzmus. It said clearly. The previous page he said, "Achen ata kel mistata b'chinas Hester koyach ha'ein sof k'may koyach ha'gili." Yeah. What I wondered the other class was, I was wondering whether this is three koiches, the koich of kol batzmus ayin of yashamiti, the ayin of yashanivra, and is there a third thing called the koich hester of tzimtzum? Or is the koich hester included in one of those, in the second one? I think it sounds to me a little like a third, but I'm not positive. I have to do a little more research on that to see if there's even an answer. That would explain
Always a part of the first prayer.
That would be maybe Helama Atzmi would be the level that is the ultimately where the Koyach HaTzimtzum comes from, and the Eir Ein Sof that is the Galus LaAtzmi would be the root of Eir HaBligvul, and the Koyach and the Eir, the Galus LeZulose LeTzerech HaElemis, that's the Eir of the root of Mamala Kalam and the Eir HaGvul, and the Koyach HaGvul, though the Rishima would be rooted in Helama Atzmi, and that's where the Tzimtzum is also rooted. That's probably how it works. If you wanted my opinion, I have to think about it some more. The only thing is, yeah, I probably would say something like that.
Which is probably a part of the first oil, the Helama Atzmi. If you don't want to make it for a separate new entity, you could include it in the first oil that the Choltoi, he could make also the second one.
No,
This is
but
the
first,
symptom.
no, but the first oil is a gili la'atzmei. There is a gili just la'atzmei. Helama atzmi is not a gili la'atzmei. That's why I'm saying it as a third. Okay, but I have to look a little more into it. Possibly there's some overlap because, yeah, but I'll leave it at that for now. Did everyone understand my last piece that I just said? Or okay. Are there any other questions? I will say that this last piece from Ayin Beis is pretty unique. Is the Rebbe Rashab in full glory? Reminds me very much of Torah Shalom. He's saying things here that you don't find in other Maimorim very often. Sometimes a little, but there's definitely a certain expansiveness here that is not so common. Just to add that point. Someone was on, go ahead.
I don't know why he needs the first one, Gilui Atzmai. I mean, Hashem is such a panimi. The Atzmas is the essence of panimi. So why would he have to do two stages? He could just go
God
to
doesn't need anything. It's not for
right.
God,
It's for us. It's for us.
Because without the Gil Atzmei, you never will experience God on God's terms in a way that is a Metzias Nimtza. It would be you want to have an oyer, it's like you want to know what the teacher is thinking for himself, not just what he's preparing for the student. So it's a connection on a conscious level. Remember, oyer is consciousness, is expression. Atzmus is not expression, not consciousness. You can't go there without oyer. There's no way that our existence can reach Atzmus without oyer. Now, oyer itself, you want to have two levels: one that relates more to us and one that relates more to Atzmus.
Thank you.
This is central to.
I got it.
Discussed this. Yeah, it's discussed a lot in Ayin Beis. Actually, in Samach Vav, in Anochi Samach Zayin, later in the Samach Vav, he actually asks why you need oyer altogether, and including the different levels of oyer. But that's part of the answer. Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer it in this context that we're discussing, but the function of this, what you're calling potentially koach hahester, or the idea of the helama atzmi, I see how that's critical for the purpose, for the sake of the tzimtzum, but I'm trying to figure out where does that fit in terms of the reintegration, like us retracing the steps. What do we learn? How do we get closer to Atzmus by coming to understand or embrace or somehow be part of this Helama Atzmi? Because we're part of the expression, we're part of the Gilui. We want to reunite with the expressor, the Maitzel. But you understand that question? I see why it's a functional necessity.
So there were pages upon pages earlier, before page 1350, where he spoke about Einoid. He spoke about how distress, that the very darkness itself of this world brings us to very high levels, like the Baal Tshuva. So there's a whole
Right.
that whole dimension to cover the very concealment itself is also can be an experience of the divine.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. In fact, it can propel us in the in that direction.
And it does. And we will discuss more of this. As I said, I'm giving a taste of it. He's not filling the whole picture, and I am doing more than the Rebbe Rashab is saying right here. But I will get back to this and far more elaborately. Trust me, because it's going to have ultimately we're going to end up seeing how each level here contributes to the other. The Gili La'atzmei contributes to Gili L'Tzerech Elemis to the Gili La'atzmei. The Helam Ha'atzmi comes into play as well. The root of the containers, the Rishimu. So at the end of the day, we're still in the middle of it. Right now, he's talking more Yechudi Lo, Yechudi Tata, more Oyer. He's not really talking about the Helam that much. He's talking about the Tzimtzum, yes, the power of Tzimtzum, but he's not talking about the root of the power of the Tzimtzum. But at the end of the day, what we're going to have is an extremely eloquent, you can say mosaic of so many different forces that define our existence, and each one fits in together like a puzzle that will give us as big a picture of Atzmus as possible. At the end of the day, we know Oyer does not give us the picture of the essence of Atzmus. It's the expression of Atzmus. And Helem does give us a picture of the essence somewhat. Like he spoke about the Yesh, but I don't want to go there because he's not talking about the Yesh right now. He's talking much more about levels of Bittul. And that's why I want to not conflate too many matters. And I don't want to over-process it either. But as you see it all come together, remember, all this is still Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. He hasn't talked about Ner Mitzvah and Torah Oyer. Remember that. So we have Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. We have talked about Tefillah a lot from the bottom up. So if you really want to broaden the picture, you have to bring that into, but that is going to come next. After he finishes this, remember the Mittler Rebbe will continue to explain how it's connected to Ner Mitzvah and the questions that he asked, and then ultimately Torah Oyer and the role of each of them. You'll see it all comes together tremendous. But the Torah Oyer and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer is very, very critical in understanding it well. The more I read, the more I see that.
Thank you. This is all very, very exciting. I just have to say that.
Yeah.
Buy your new Did you buy your new hiking boots, Yitzhak, for the new year?
I'm all stocked up. I got plenty of Band-Aids for the blisters I'm going to incur as well.
And I would also add not just hiking boots. I think you should also include seat belts.
Absolutely.
Good one.
Okay.
So it's all very exciting.
Yeah. So I don't even though it's 2.5 pages from the end of Ayin Beis, I don't feel it's the end because I know the Mittler Rebbe is going to come right to the rescue here and help us really understand where Ayin Beis would have developed. So it is technically then, but it's not because the Rebbe Rashab didn't finish. So you're going to see it's going to be a little, I don't want to say frustrating, but when you finish here, you see that's literally in the middle of all kinds of things that have not been tied together. But we'll do it. We'll get there. It'll be an interesting journey. A few people have actually asked me if they said to me that they heard that I'm going to be finished, bringing from other places. Because a lot of people who finish Ayin Beis remain, actually befuddled because a lot of things have not been really finished up. But we'll get there. Yeah.
Is this something you? Yeah. You can turn off the record. I just have an administrative question.
We'll stop here about the middle. Okay, let me stop the recording. Then you could ask.